to unmute. Good morning, everyone. Okay. Okay. Welcome, everyone. All of our participants that are joining in, we welcome you this morning to the Brand Africa 100 Best Brands Report for 2020. Today, we're looking at the Nigerian edition. We're so excited to have you join us this morning. I'm just going to welcome everyone very quickly, and then we go straight into it. Just quickly, we know that this is about brands. Just to make a couple of comments about why brands matter. For all of us, as I like to say, that products is what companies make, brands is what people buy. And the reason for that is largely because brands provide safety. They help with decision making. They short circuit our decision making process. Instead of when you're in the category of products, you can quickly just decide the one you want to buy based on the brands that you love and you admire. They provide us peace of mind. They also help us to express who we are. I believe that brands are a means of communication for consumers. They add value. Brands also give us a reason to share, a reason to interact with people. Most importantly, brands create difference. They allow both products to differentiate who they are. They allow consumers to differentiate themselves from others. Okay, so today we've got a very, very beautiful, rich and robust program that we're going to deliver on. If we look at the program of events today, the welcome remarks by me has already been made. My good friend and brother Thebe Ikalafeng is going to come on very shortly and take us through the report, the methodology, what are some of the insights and rankings that we see in there at an Africa level and then on the Nigerian level. And then we've put together a very rich panel today that we're going to be discussing with. Our moderator is Seyi Adeoye. You meet Tosin shortly in a few minutes. We've got Thebe on the panel. We've got Martin Mabutho, the Chief Customer Officer of MultiChoice Nigeria on the panel. We've got Seyi Adeoye, the CEO of Pierrine Consulting on the panel. And then you've got myself, Feyi Olubodun, Managing Partner of Open Squares in there. And then please, while the presentation is going on, please type into the Q&A section all your answers. Very critical, when we're presenting and when we're doing the panel, all participants should have their microphones muted during the presentations. And then the Q&A feature on Zoom is there. Please continually post your questions as the presentation is going on. We'll be tracking those. And during the panel discussion, towards the end of it, we're going to create an opportunity where we'll have the panelists to address your questions. And most importantly, a recording of the webinar will be sent to you by email for your reference to watch again and so on and so forth. And please, while this is going on, join the conversation online on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter. We're also broadcasting there live and also on Instagram. Look for Brand Africa on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and Brand African Network on Instagram. Please use the hashtag Africa's Best Brands 2020, Nigeria's Best Brands 2020. Okay, so now I'm going to hand over to my very good friend, Thebe Ikalafeng, the founder and chairman of Brand Africa, who's been doing this for the past 10 years. Welcome, Thebe.
Thank you so much, Feyi, and welcome Africa. Welcome the rest of the world. So very excited to be in Nigeria today via this the cyber world. Want to take a little bit about the journey that we've taken over the last 10 years in terms of how we go about to determine these best brands in Nigeria. We do this in two ways. On one side, we partnered with Geopol, and Geopol as our research partner, and they collect the data for us and collate the data, and Kantar then helps us to distill all this data. As you see in a minute, it's tons of data that we get from around the world. Take that data, and why you ask the question, why are we going mobile? Well, 747 million people have a SIM connection in our continent, and 49% of them have access to a basic mobile. So mobile is really the way that we need to connect in the continent. They say 87% of the connections in sub-Saharan Africa will be all mobile broadband by 2025. So we partnered with Geopol for a simple reason. They've got over 250 million subscribers across the continent. They've done over 10 million interviews across emerging markets. So we partner with them because we believe that the best way to reach people is through mobile, and Geopol helps us do that. It's an SMS-based survey. Go and a mobile base, and we combine SMS, mobile, and in some places where it's difficult to reach, we'll do a Facebook. We speak to respondents 18 years and older. And it's probably the most comprehensive research today on the continent. I mean, we started 10 years ago with only 8 countries. We're now up to 27 countries. And these countries, they represent 80%, over 80% of the population of the continent, but also over 80% of the gross domestic product of the continent. So it is very comprehensive, very summative. While this does not assume that every country is the same, but we pretty much cover quite a bit of the continent to get you. So when we ask them to name us 3 brands. The 3 brands that they have to list, and out of that survey, we get over 15,000 individual brand mentions. Over 15,000. Imagine we have to dig through all this, and we get about 3,000 unique brand mentions. So we now have to dig through this. You can imagine yourself going through a market, and trying to find your favorite brands. We do similar thing. We try to sort out all these brands to arrive at the top 100 brands. And in order to do that. In order to do that, what Kantar then does is Kantar then goes through the entire. And we partner also. Kantar is our partner in this, as I've said, and they help us to sort out these brands. And what Kantar then does takes all those 15,000 brands, all those 3,000 plus unique mentions, and create a unique score. And with that unique score, the reason we do a weighted average as well is we're able to account for countries like Nigeria, which has got about 200 million people, and a country like Namibia, which has about 2 million people. So in order to make the comparison a bit fair, we have to create a weighted average score that takes into consideration the sample and the population of every country. To make the top 100, the brands have to be recalled in at least one other country. So you cannot just be the best brand just by being the best in your country. So you have to be in another country as well. The 4 key areas that the survey covers, we ask a broad question. What is your most admired brand? We don't tell them which country, we don't tell them anything. Then we ask them, what is your most admired African brand? Then we ask them, what is your most admired financial services brand and most admired media brand? You may ask, why have we separated financial services and media? You know, what we've learned over the years is consumers don't look at financial services and media as quote-unquote brands. They view them as necessary evils, if you will. They say, I need the money and I need a channel to tell the story. So we decided, because we're noticing over the years that when you look at the list of the top 100, you don't get to see anything from financial services and you don't get to see anything from media. So I'm going to share a little bit about some of the things that we've discovered over the years doing the survey. Give it 2 seconds. Let me just get to back to the results. Thank you. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about the results over the survey. So these are some of the 2020 highlights. As I've said earlier, over 15,000 brand mentions, over 2,000, over 3,000 unique brands have been mentioned in the survey. And this is the first key takeout. Only 13% of the brands that Africans admire are from Africa. So out of the top of 100, only 13%. And you know, we started 2010 with the survey, and then 34% of the brands that Africans admire. But then we're at 8 countries. But now, as we're getting closer to the rest of the continent, we're now beginning to get a good picture of where the continent is. Those 13%, most of them are all in Nigeria. So you can see leading, South Africa, and Kenya. So those 3 countries, coincidentally, the economic hubs of sub-Saharan Africa are really where the brands are. So if you look at individually every single country, at the top of every single country, 85% of the brands across the continent in every country are non-African. So how's that? Only Tanzania with Azam, only Zimbabwe with Econet, only Zambia with Trade Kings is the top brand in the country, the #1 in the country as well. Even a country like South Africa, M10 is not #1, but it's #1 in Liberia. So only 4 brands across the continent are #1 in their domicile countries. We know this much. Global brands are dominating and African brands are faltering in a way. Why global brands are dominating the continent? Well, they're dominating for a couple of reasons. One, football, sports. You look at between Adidas and Nike and Puma, they pretty much is the religion of the continent. They cover every single part of the continent. They dominate also for another interesting reason. So if you look at whether it's in Nigeria, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, or any part of West Africa, you see those beautiful fabrics. Or you go to East Africa, you look at the Kikois, or you go to Botswana, where we were last week, and when they're on the Tasty, they call it a German brand fabric. None of the fabrics. Most of them are not from the continent. So the global brands have found a way to ingratiate themselves or to become part of the fabric of the continent. So we may say made in Africa when we dress so beautifully in our boo-boos and everything else, but generally the fabrics we use are not. The designs may be from Africa, but generally the products are not from Africa. The global brands are doing well because brands like Samsung, for example, they've created particular products and brands which fit the needs of African consumers. And then you go to a brand like Guinness. I mean, more people in Africa drink Guinness than the people in Ireland, where the brand comes from. So you now get to understand. But then, you know, when you look at what Guinness them have done in the continent, they've really found a way to be African, if you will. The other thing that we're seeing across all the surveys is to increase financial inclusion, digital has been the key driver. Whether it's mobile money, whether it's M-Pesa in East Africa, whether it's Airtel and many others, Airtel Money. I mean, M-Pesa has been a fascinating case study of social entrepreneurship, if you will, social enterprise in the continent. About 60 to 70% of the GDP of Kenya goes through M-Pesa. So mobile is definitely the way that we are going to do so. But telcos are a lot more than just mobile. They are seen as media. They are seen as financial services. They are seen as telephony. So the telcos have really transformed themselves in terms of how they see themselves. But what always excites me, and when I saw this trend coming up in our rankings, I said innocent, and I said innocent, a Nigerian brand, and they said we want to eradicate the Tokungo, the foreign use automobiles from Africa. I love that. I thought here is a brand that is bold enough to say we can move the continent. I mean, if you go to Uganda, for example, where the Akira, the first electric car, and then you say Africans we can compete. We can create products, we can move our own people, and the examples are there with brands like Innocent, which is moving up. Then, of course, Jumia launched spectacularly on the New York Stock Exchange last year. And then there are many other brands which we started, in the continent, like Tusker, for example, in Kenya, very strong brand there. But it's no longer owned by the Kenyans, but we'll keep it. It's a Kenyan brand. It's an African brand. So that's why sometimes when we look at these rankings, we resolved actually a few years ago that if it is made, conceived, and consumed by Africans, it's an African brand. It's made in Africa, consumed by African, and conceived by Africans. It's an African brand. We don't care really now who buys it. We should, but we are learning a lot that it's not always like that. Then you look at brands, like you look at conglomerates like Dangote in Nigeria, West Africa, Azam in East Africa. These businesses are now bigger than they don't just make flour or oil or cement, they do everything. I mean, a brand like Azam, they even have their own TV channel, in East Africa. But of course, we can't escape that a lot of the brands that we admire in the continent are made in the United States. We asked an interesting question. We asked across the continent, what are your most admired African brands? You know, when we went through the list and we looked at the list, Coke, Nike, Techno were in the list. So we said there are brands which are actually not African, which Africans view as Africans because of what they've done, what they've done in the continent. And the reason they've done well in the continent is a brand like Coca-Cola. 90 years here. They found ways to create distribution solutions, distribution strategies, marketing communication that speaks African, if you want, speaks African. Then you look at a brand like Nike, for example. I mean, what have you heard the last 3 months? Social justice. Well, we've heard it for the last 400 years, I guess. But social justice. But of the last recent few months, brands like Nike have really understood that they can play an important role. That perhaps explains why Nike has performed so well in the continent. You look at some of whether they are challenging a social justice issue from a Colin Kaepernick or Caster Semenya fighting the rights to compete as who she is, or supporting Eliud Kipchoge to break the sub-2-hour marathon. So Nike, brands like Nike has really found a way to be part of the African story. Or you come to Nigeria, partnering to create with Wizkid, Nike partnering to build the brand, the Starboy brand. So using African influencers. So beginning to see why a brand like Nike really is successful. Netflix, Nollywood, you see where we are. So we're beginning to also create the channels that compete with the Hollywood or within their channels and tell our stories in our own way. That's what we're beginning to see. Or partnering with somebody like Karabo from South Africa, Nike created a whole new range of products in that space. Then you look at a brand like Techno. I mean, Techno is not even sold in China, but mark my words, couple of years, it will be the number one brand in our technological brand. Unless an African brand, of course, rises to the challenge. I mean, Techno is zooming through the continent as a preferred brand. And then, of course, a brand like Dangote, as I've said earlier, you know, they've looked at it and says, how do we turn our own natural resources into finished goods? So now we have our own brands, our own people competing with the rest of the world. So from Nigeria, we are able to, or from South Africa, or from Kenya, or from Addis, or Ethiopia, we are now building brands that are going into the continent, and we are able to tell our stories wherever we go in the world, and proudly so. I mean, it's always so inspiring when you see Africans everywhere else asserting their Africanness. I think it's Fela said, I heard the story actually from Feyi, I think. I was talking about how why Fela named all their kids, all his kids with Nigerian names. He says, so that wherever they travel in the world, when they do well, and they mention that they've done well, and they mention with their name, whether it's Femi or Feyi, whatever name they use, people will say, that's a Nigerian or that's an African. So the honor will come right back to the continent. So if you look at those brands which are perceived to be African, Coke, Nike, Technos, Nestle, Adidas, Flisco, Samsung, Vodacom, Airtel, Guinness, those brands, Vodafone, those brands are doing well. So because I think they've tried to find something, how to think local and act global. So here are the rankings for the continent, quick summary on the continent, and then specifically the rankings for Nigeria. The first one is we looked at what is in the continent, just a recap of some of the results you may have seen, what the most admired brands overall. This is what we've learned. Nike, number one. I think I've explained, I've given the case of what we've observed of why the brand has gone up. Adidas made the case, Samsung, Coca-Cola, Techno. So you can see these brands are why they're doing 30%, as I said, African out of the top 100. Then we looked at most admired African brands. So then you can see unprompted, MTN, prompted. When we ask an important question, what is your most admired African brand? No doubt, last 3 years in a row, Dangote. So Africans are very clear when you are across the continent, and you'll see later in Nigeria especially as well, when you ask them what makes African, I think that's a very proud thing to aspire to as well in terms of when you say what is the most admired African brand. So you'll be able to compete as an African, but also compete globally and Pan-African. Top 10 most admired financial services brands, GT Bank, done spectacularly. I think if you look at the results of GT Bank this year, which was released a few months ago, you will see that there's a correlation between how the brand is doing, what it's investing in, and the outcome of in the bottom line. I mean, GT, everybody knows what GT Bank has done in Nigeria and many other countries. Most admired media brands, we're still Pan-African. Interesting. When you look at across the continent, just a summary across the continent, it's always 72, 75% non-African and 12% are mobile. So you can see there's a bit of interesting data, but I understand why. Legacy, that's legacy. BBC has been around the continent forever with their world service brand. CNN, will repeat the same story 400 times, so we'll get into our consciousness. DSTV, we know it's a channel of channels. We know, and it's always proud for me when I see a brand like a DSTV, because it means that for when Africans are looking for news or information about their brands or their stories, they go to a channel that's brought to you by DSTV. So it's probably the only brand there that is not a direct medium itself, but it is the medium of media. Or the media, maybe that's really the way to see it. But I think it's interesting to see an MTN there as well. It's what I spoke about earlier, that we saw mobile brands as media as well. Now, the most admired brands in Nigeria. First, number 3, Samsung. Number 2, MTN. Across board, most admired brand. We didn't ask a question. We didn't say Nigerian. We didn't say African. We didn't say international. We just said, which brands do Nigerians choose first? And the brand they chose first is Coca-Cola. I think I've spoken the story of Coca-Cola over 90 years in the continent in terms of what they've done in the continent. And I think when they said we want to be within an arm's reach of every thirsty person, they really got to work to do just that. Congratulations to Coca-Cola, MTN 2, 3 Samsung, 4 Dangote, 5 in Airtel. Next, the most admired Nigerian brands. So now we're specific. Now we ask the question, what is the most admired Nigerian brand? When you get to that list, number 3, Star. I'm smiling because every single country survey I've gone through, there's always a beer somewhere. And I imagine during very hot months and days, we all need a star within an arm's reach. And second, gotta call somebody. Glo, the #1 brand in Nigeria, #1 Nigerian brand, most admired Nigerian brand. No question, Dangote. Dominant performance. Walking through the markets in Lagos, I like when I'm in Nigeria or in any country really. I walk around, I go to the markets. I want to go to markets because that's where the people are. And I see there's always a Dangote somewhere. But what was quite interesting for me this time around, I was there a few months ago and before COVID told us to stay home. I was in the market and I saw pictures. I saw at the market posters with Aliko Dangote himself, and then posters with the product themselves. And I've learned something. If you Google Dangote, you're gonna get two things: the man and the brand. So somehow there seems to be a key correlation or catalyst of what's also built the brand is the excellence of the brand, but also the leadership of the person. So even across the continent, Africans can link the person to the brand to the person. Probably contributed a whole lot to that. And because also Dangote, as I said earlier, whether it's oil, whether it's cement, whether it's flour, they are everywhere. They are everywhere within an arm's reach. The top 10 most admired Nigerian brands: Dangote, Glo, Star Beer, Nesco, GT, Maltina, NTA. It's always interesting, always interesting to see when it's not a particular medium, but it's institutional brand like an NTA in terms of how strong it is. I said there's always a beer within an arm's reach. It's not Star at 3, Hero at 8, then Jubia. The next most admired brands we looked at what we now specifically asked the question: most admired African brands in Nigeria. So the previous question: what's your most admired brand in Nigeria? And before I finish that, I'll go into that. Congratulations to Dangote again, most admired Nigerian brand. So what's the most admired African brand? So now here we are being specific. What is an African brand in Nigeria? So we said to them, don't tell me about Coke, don't tell me about other brands. What is your most admired brand? Third, DSTV. 2, MTN. And 3, or #1, Dangote. The face, the product, the presence. So the brand is always present. We can link it to the person. We can link it to the product. We can link it to excellence. And it is in many areas where we are, where consumers need. Those African brands in Nigeria: Dangote, MTN, DSTV, Glo, Innocent, ShopRite, Nasco, UBA, Chivira, Vironi. Those are your top 10 brands in Nigeria, 12 African brands in Nigeria. Then the most admired financial services brands. So now we went to financial services brands in Nigeria. Financial services brands in Nigeria: #3, UBA. #2, probably one of the oldest banks in Nigeria, first bank since 1894, First Bank. And the #1 brand, GT. There's no surprise there. I've spoken about the story about GT. Whether it's also, what's interesting about banks is that banks can be so cold because banks can be so transactional. But when a brand like GT then says we're going to associate ourselves with a lifestyle event, like a fashion event. So now they are coming out behind the counter and they are going to integrate with people. As Africans, we love to look good, we love style, or we don't love style, we have style. So GT understands that if you want to connect with Africans, you go to where they are stylish. #10, top 10 financial brands in Nigeria: GT, First Bank, UBA, Access, Zenith, EcoBank, Fidelity, MTN Mobile. We spoke about the J's and that point. Now, what's interesting there is can see only 2 brands are not from Nigeria: EcoBank and the mobile money brand MTN. that's quite something, and that's quite a good thing. I think it's probably what we say, charity begins at home. It doesn't say that Nigerians are blindly, or any other country, following their home brands. It says the home brands are as good, if not better, than any competition that comes to the country. And that's what we need to strive for. We need to strive for building those great brands which outperform other brands in the continent. And that's what we are seeing. Then we ask for, again, broad question, media brand. Congratulations to GT Bank for a sustained performance. GT Bank has always been in the list the last few years. We've been doing these studies. Most admired brands, media brands in Nigeria. We need the media brands because that's how we're going to tell our stories. I mean, as Africans, we need to tell our own stories with the channels. So as Africans, we always complain that we are not in charge of our stories. So this category looks at general. The next category will look at Nigerian specific media brands. First on the list, NTA 3, Channels 2, and these are Nigerian brands, and DSTV. DSTV in Nigeria, number one. So this incredible performance again in terms of within this category, looking at just media across all Africans. Then we ask specifically, and you can look at the list. It's interesting, as I think you can see Samsung seen, LG seen as a media channels. Why? Because they've got mobile brands. And those mobile brands, people see them as how they tell their stories. Then we ask the specific question, what's the most admired Nigerian media brand? When you ask that particular question, the list says 3, TVC, 2, NTA. Congratulations first before I go to the next. Congratulations to DSTV for really being their channel of channels and enabling us as Africans to be able to see our brands, our stories, by bringing in those media channels, which you can see as many of these through that. Number one brand, number one most admired Nigerian media brand, Channels TV. Interesting. You know, I was speaking to Feyi, and I was saying to my friend Feyi, I said, Feyi, I've never heard of that. I said, I'm going through the results. Just help me understand this channels. He's like, oh, now this is the one. He says, if you look at all the research in this country, it will come up on top. So again, exciting. Because the stronger the media brands that come from Africa, the clearer and the more authentic will be the story that comes from Africa. And that's what we need to strive for. We need to strive for creating channels as successful as this, as channels out of Nigeria and DSTV, which originated out of South Africa, to be able to channel our own brands and our own brand stories. There's your list of the top 10 Nigerian media brands. And now we go to the most admired listed brands in Nigeria. By far, Dangote. And then next, we ask ourselves the question, having seen all the brands, all the studies, all the categories, from the top 100 across the continent, the top in the country, across categories, from a listing, what would be your brand of the year? No doubt, Dangote. Congratulations to Dangote as the number one brand, Nigerian brand, number one African brand, most admired listed brand, and overarching brand of the year in Nigeria. Congratulations. That, ladies and gentlemen, are your results. And now I'm going to hand over to my sister. Tosin Adeveko, who will lead a conversation, perhaps with some of the brands, and will bring some of us on board. Tosin, good morning.
Good morning, Thebe. Good morning, everyone. I think Feyi wanted to do the introduction so that I'm not talking about myself. I'll leave him to do that, then I will continue.
Okay. Thank you, Thebe, for that awesome presentation. I mean, I've been with you on this for a couple of years. It's exciting every time. To our audience, let me quickly introduce Tosin Adefeko, who is going to be our moderator. Tosin is someone I've known for years and respect quite a lot. She's the founder and CEO of 83 Resources. She's a corporate executive and business leader with over 25 years multi-sectoral experience in Nigeria. She recently founded 83 Resources Limited, a specialized consultancy focused on enhancing the productivity of key clientele across local corporates, multinationals, and influential private clients using strategic communications. The multidisciplinary consultants at 83 Resources are the go-to specialists for public relations, stakeholder management, media interventions, and special events. She increasingly derives personal fulfillment working on impactful social investment projects with a number of not-for-profit organizations, which include also Leadership Academy, WIMBIT, and Nigeria Economic Summit Group. She was recently listed as one of the top 50 women in marketing communications by Brand Communicator. And Tosin is also an awesome mother of 3 children and the wife of 1 husband. Epic, I'm telling you. So Tosin, please, you're welcome.
And the husband is on the call now. Feyi, you're far too kind. Thebe, you're a great guy. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Africa. I have the great honor and privilege to moderate the Brand Africa 2020 panel session. I have 4 hefty men with me here. But before I go into introducing them, if you're just joining us, we've had the most illuminating and revealing presentation done to us by Thebe just now, which spoke to Africa's leading brands, their peculiarities, and how they rank vis-a-vis their global counterparts. The statistics were, quite revealing. I will not go into too much detail on that. Thebe's done good justice of that. I'll share some highlights in a bit. Let me introduce these men that I spoke about, and I'll start from Thebe himself. He's the founder and chairman, Brand Africa. I have interacted with Thebe all of a few hours, and I've come to the conclusion that we will be great friends. He's laughing, hilarious. What are the odds, right? Okay, listen to his profile, and you will agree that, if you were me, you would connect with him instantly. Thebe is arguably the foremost global African branding authority. In a distinguished corporate career, which started at Colgate-Palmolive in New York and concluded as Chief Marketing Officer for Nike for Africa. He has won over 75 awards in branding and marketing and marketing communications globally. He's the founder of the award-winning Brand Leadership Group and has worked on over 100 corporate, nation, and political brands across Africa. He has been recognized by New African Magazine as one of the 100 most influential Africans. He founded Brand Africa 100, Africa's Best Brands, the only Pan-African research and ranking of brands in Africa to provide a metric to assess how African brands compare against global brands and to promote excellence in building brands in Africa. He has been to every country in Africa and over 110 countries from the Arctic to Antarctica. Do you now believe me when I say Thebe is going to be my very good friend? You're welcome, Thebe.
Thank you.
Okay, Feyi Olubodun, as he rightly said, I've known Feyi much longer than I've known Thebe. He is one of our co-hosts for today. He's founder and managing partner, Open Squares. Feyi Olubodun is one of the leading authorities on understanding the African marketplace. He's the founder and managing partner of Open Squares Africa, a marketing strategy consulting firm focused on advising multinationals and indigenous businesses on how to win in the African marketplace. He's the author of the seminal book, The Villager, How Africans Consume Brands, which articulates the only proprietary framework for understanding African consumers. He's a seasoned business leader. Feyi was previously the CEO of Inside Publicis, Nigeria's foremost and arguably West Africa's largest marketing communications firm. An inspiring speaker and facilitator, he is considered a leading authority on the African consumer and has given talks on international platforms across Europe and Africa. Please welcome Feyi Olubodun.
Thank you very much, Tosin.
I have with me here another great gentleman. I've known him for yonks as well. He's Chief Customer Officer, MultiChoice Nigeria, Martin Mabutho. He drives the customer-focused strategy of MultiChoice Nigeria, which includes sales, marketing, customer experience, and value management. Martin has close to 2 decades cognitive experience in the broadcast media industry. A Pan-African marketer, Martin's career spans several marketing functions, including advertising, public relations, digital and online marketing, event management, and many other disciplines across 20 African countries. He emerged Marketing Professional of the Year at the Marketing World Awards in 2015, Brand Personality of the Year at the Marketing Edge Awards in 2016, and was also appointed Goodwill Ambassador by Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry in 2014. It is great to have you with us today as a co-host as well, Martin.
Thank you, thank you.
Seyi Adeoye. Seyi is, last but not the least, his Chief Executive Officer, Pierrine Consulting. I've been practicing Pierrine. I'm hoping Seyi would acknowledge that I didn't call that wrongly.
It's a good Yoruba name, so you should be able to say it.
Business leader, coach, and switched-on professional with hands-on C-level experience spanning business leadership, strategy, marketing, and innovation. He's the Chief Executive Officer of Pierrine Consulting, an insight-led firm with strong focus on helping brands across Africa achieve results and sustainable growth. You're very welcome, Seyi. Now, thank you. Having introduced this gentleman, you will agree with me that I have the best crop of people to discuss brands and brands in Africa. Nigeria, to be specific for today, but all-encompassing. Today, we're at the African Brands 2020 again. As I said earlier, some statistics have been shared, most admired brands, best brands in Africa, and the likes. But let me share a few key highlights for those of you that are just joining us. African brands dropped to an all-time low of 13% this year. Non-African brands account for 87% of the top 100 brands in Africa. Nike retains its #1 position in Africa for the 3rd year in a row. Out of the top 100 brands in the 2010-2011 rankings, only half remain in the top tables, due to mergers and acquisitions and obsolescence. Europe retains continental lead with 42%, North America and Asia with less than 6%. Dangote and MTN retain rankings as Africa's most admired African brands. MTN is #1 brand recalled African brand spontaneously, recalled among the top 100. Dangote is #1 African brand when consumers are prompted to recall an African brand. Now, these are some of the key statistics that Thebe had shared with us in detail. Now, I'm going to start with you, Thebe. You're the promoter of the Brand Africa 100, currently in its 10th year. You have been to all countries in Africa, managed leading global brands. As the foremost authority on brands spanning diverse sectors, we heard all the stats, top of which is that 87% of all #1 brands in every country in Africa is not from Africa. And only 13% of the brands at the top are from Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa. You will agree with me that this has been a challenging decade for African brands. Tell me, Thebe, how did we get here?
I think we got here for a couple of reasons. You know, in 2010, there was a euphoria about, oh, the World Cup is coming to Africa, and excitement, but also there was this renaissance, you know, the African Renaissance. I think maybe a year or so before we rebranded to the African Union from the OAU. So there's an excitement about being African. But as soon as that excitement settled down, we learned a few things. A couple of things that we learned. One is we as Africans, and it's something that people like Fela and Kwame have said it for many years, we have not embraced who we are. And if you don't embrace who we are as Africans, it becomes very difficult for you to consume something that is African. To me, that's been one of the biggest problems. So we don't champion Africanship because we're constantly bringing down Africans. The standard that we put up for being African is not the same standard that we've put up for any other brands that come to the continent. But I think the other reason is an institutional one, or African institutional one. We have not, as African institutions, governments, and all those, promoted African brands or African businesses. So we are very quick to incentivize global brands which are coming to Africa, or global businesses which are coming to Africa, open up the doors for them to be able to do business in our countries. The third is, I think the big challenge is a legacy challenge. These brands, like I've said, with Coca-Cola, 100 years here in the continent. Now, if you look at which African brand has been around, I mean, we've mentioned, for example, Nigeria First Bank has been around since 1894. But generally, many of the African brands have not been around for so long. So we don't have the tenure, if you will. Don't have the tenure in the continent. But to me, the two most important reasons of why we are not doing well as Africans is, first, research is one of fourth research. So if you look at how much Africans spend on research in the countries, in the continent, Africa, if Africa invests only less than 0.5% in research and development, whereas if you go to other other countries, other continents, they spend upwards of 5% in R&D. So if you're not researching, how are you going to create? The third one, the next one is intellectual property. So, so if you look at how many trademarks Africans are registering every year, Africans are only registering about, if you look at all the trademarks registered in the world, you go to World International Intellectual Property Organization, they will tell you that only 2% of the trademarks which are registered globally are from Africa. Now, if you look at countries like China, like America, they're in the 20%. So they are not only are they putting money in research, not only are they creating the brands, but the third thing that they do is they are registering, they are owning their ideas. We don't own the ideas. Matter of fact, as I said earlier about how we open the markets, you look at a country like Rwanda, we have a lot of this second-hand markets where people say bring second-hand clothes into our countries. What has that done to the continent? It has decimated the textile industry. So people cannot create businesses of making clothes. But what did Rwanda do? Rwanda said, stop it. Nobody is bringing second-hand clothing into my country. We are going to rather incentivize the local textile industry to be able to compete. Why don't I leave it at that? Because I think I've given quite a few, from my view, some of the reasons. Open borders, we are too open. We're not spending money on research. We are not spending money on, we're not protecting our through intellectual property. We're not proud of being African. We are, and that's why, having been to every single country, and people say to me, how could Gucci be the top 100 in the continent? I said, very simple. Go look at all the markets. You'll find all the fake Gucci's there. You'll find all the fake Louis Vuittons. You'll find all these international brands. They are here because we've opened up the markets, and the markets have not just opened for authentic products, but it's also been open for all the fake products which have come here. And because we watch all these other TV channels, and we see MTV, we see all of them, and we see all these rap stars and hip hop stars wearing Gucci and glamorizing and deifying Louis Vuitton and all those, we also want to have those brands. But we cannot access them because we cannot afford them, but we can afford the fake ones. And that's why those brands are doing well here.
Thank you very much, Thebe. Your perspectives were quite interesting. If I hear you well, you're saying Africa does not love Africa, so we need to embrace ourselves more. In summary, I'll come back to you. Stay with your thoughts. Let me move on to Martin very quickly. Leaning on to what Thebe has just shared with us, you're the master storyteller. I like to think you've run a brand that I would consider as the ultimate storyteller. We're in the age of the story. Your platform, DSTV, is the predominant source of African stories, but it seems that there's still many stories left untold. Do you think we're telling our stories enough? And how can we do better, especially with African brands?
Thank you very much for the question. I think firstly, let me establish that we set out to become Africa's #1 storyteller, deliberately so. without a platform to tell the stories, to showcase the talent, be it music, is it acting, movie making, then we'll be in a much worse situation. So where we are now in terms of acceptance across borders, I think speaks to the lack of collaboration amongst the same talent we've got a platform laid out for. With better collaboration, and we encourage that. We recently, just to give an example, we recently worked with an organization for a virtual concert, trying to raise funds to buy PPEs for COVID. It worked beautifully. It looks like the problem that we have is that everybody is going at it on their own. And that is why our role as a platform that cuts across, and we're in 48 countries. We always even show content from East Africa to West Africans, Nigerian content or West African content throughout the country. It is for that reason that today, if you walk in Uganda, you'll see kids speaking or imitating Mr. Ibu or listening or humming to a Dipanj song. That is the power of what the platform has done. Are we there yet? No, we're not. How do we get there? I don't have all the answers, but I believe that we should start by collaborating and raising the level of acceptance of these brands. Yes, there are some individuals that have gone at it alone. We know individuals that Thebe spoke about earlier that not only design Nikes in South Africa, but in New York, they go and they do the makeup in music videos for big talent. And that's just a small little bit of what the talent that are inherent, that are bought, and the appetite kind of outside could potentially turn out to be if we collaborated and worked together to try and put Africa on the map. The music has done it. Film is doing it. We now need a stronger voice in other sectors. But for us as a media player, I think we've done a bit and just need to be encouraged and joined by other players to take it even further.
Thank you, Martin. I guess the key takeaway with your perspective is collaboration is key, and we must focus on looking for new opportunities, either locally and globally, and developing our talent pool. Thank you for that, Martin. Let me bring Feyi in now very quickly. Feyi, you are a leading authority on the African consumer and the African marketplace. Tell us, upon all the accolades that we give ourselves, why are our brands not at the top of the charts? What can African brands do better to emerge at the top?
Thank you for your question, Tosin. I think the critical thing that we've observed is that indigenous African brands have got to be more focused and committed to very rigorous and professional brand building processes around their brands. The brands that we see that are elevated in this report and in this survey did not arrive at that in one day. And if you look at the structures and the processes that they use to build their brands, these are world-class structures and processes. And indigenous African brands have got to also begin to follow the same and build the same, and not just assume that because we've got the people, we've got the population, and that if you take any product out to the market and you're making sales, that means you built a brand. You know, brand building goes beyond just driving sales and just bringing in numbers. You know, so we've got to be able to do that. We've got to follow some of those principles that build strong brands and be rigorous in following that when we're building African brands. I think that's where the big gap is really for most of the brands across the continent that are indigenous brands.
I'm not going to leave you yet, Feyi. I'm going to stay with you a little because you speak about rigor and building, you know, indigenous brands, but you are one of the greatest leaders of brand building. Over the years, I've known you to work on several, you know, big Nigerian brands. Which ones can you tell us have been through this rigor and have been able to excel beyond what the other brands are looking at?
Well, let me use an example from even the report that we've looked at today. You look, for instance, at Star. the beer, just stay there. Star is a Nigerian brand. It's been there forever. It's one of the few brands in Nigeria that has been iconized by customers by giving it a pet name, so to speak, Shine Bobo and all of that. Now you look at how, and I've worked on Star before, you look at how Star was built. There's the rigor of consumer research that is done to see how to position the brand correctly to consumers. There's the element of storytelling where both the history and the heritage of the brand is interwoven with the desires and the nuances of people that consume this brand locally. And all of that comes together in great campaigns like the Joromi campaign and all of that, with the song by Seyi Olubodun and all of that, really, really tuning into the hearts of the people. You also see it in the kind of platforms that brand has used consistently over the years, platforms like music. Remember stuff like Star Mega Fest, Star Quest, and all of that. A number of popular Nigerian musicians today, a couple of them were actually discovered on that platform. You see what they've done with soccer as well, the passion points of consumers and all of that. Now, when you look at, if you sit with an indigenous brand owner and you want to have such a structured conversation with them, they shy away from it. They often think that all we need to do is, if we've got a great product, if we've got great facilities and we've got a great distribution system, then we'll have a great brand. But it doesn't work like that. There's a structure to brand building. There are processes. You have to know your consumers. You have to invest in consumer research. You have to map properly what the passion points are. And you have to design a proposition that differentiates you from the rest of the bar. And then consistently, you're driving that and engaging that across all the touch points with your target consumers for years before the brand gets built and starts to gain some serious power and equity. And that's how all these great brands have been built. The Indomies of this world have done that. Even the Dangotes of this world, there's a very strong consistency around the brand values of Dangote across the continent, and it's been done over time. So those are the areas that we've got to really work at a very top level. If indigenous brands are going to be emerging as strong brands comparable with global brands as well.
Honestly, Feyi, thank you for that. I think you hit the nail on the head. I can't help but agree with you. I mean, I manage reputation for clients, and I find that not everyone is willing to invest the time that is required in building the brand. So all of the points you just made, very relevant. Hopefully someone's listening, there's a brand manager, and they need to know that more needs to be done, time needs to be given. There's a lot of dedication and rigor, as you rightly put it. Let me move on to Seyi very quickly. Seyi, you're the market research expert, one of the best actually. Tell us what are the trends and patterns of successful brands and what actually drives their growth? I'm sure many brand owners and managers will be glad for your perspectives on this.
Well, thanks, Tosin. Over time, I mean, there are a number of metrics we've seen that have become like commonalities for brands that we can call great brands or iconic brands, and there are a number of things that they do pretty well. Simply put, great brands are brands that have very solid equity with consumers. This is already assuming that these brands, for them to be great, they are very research heavy. They understand their market, they understand their consumers, and but they focus a lot in terms of building brand equity with their target market or their consumers, and they do this via a number of ways. Just bear in mind again that having a strong brand equity also means that they are able to these brands are loved and they're able to drive preference and demand for themselves within their category or the sectors where they play. Then a number of things, like I said, number one is that they have very distinct brand assets that allows them to be noticeable in the marketplace, to be easily recognized by consumers, high familiarity, as it were, in the mental workspace of consumers. And that means they have very high tonal scores. That simply means top of mind awareness, which we found over time across categories, across different studies to be strongly correlated with market performance in terms of shares. Again, we do see again and again across markets, great brands are very aggressive when it comes to digitization. They're always exploring new ways to grow, new ways, to engage with new customers, new geographies, new occasions that never relent. We touch on my next point briefly. They are also very adept at storytelling. And what that does for these brands is that they're able to build brand-linked memories via the different market engagement activities that they drive. I mean, we do know from neuroscience and neuroscience-related marketing information that is available to us right now that consumers are emotional. All humans, we're all consumers or customers in one way or the other. Over 90% of decisions that we make every day is from our subconscious mind. And then great brands understand that, and they keep looking for ways to build up brand link memories in the minds of consumers in a very meaningful manner. Beyond functional delivery of these products, they're also, seen by consumers to be very meaningful. And we've seen again that having clear brand purpose, also help in building these powerful brand link memories in the minds of consumers as these brands engage across multi-platforms, across multiple assets in the marketplace. Generally speaking, and quite important, again in Africa in particular, is distribution. I can love a brand. There might be high top of mind. Yes, I have preference for the brand. There's demand for the brand, but I can find you, in a buying situation. So great brands we've seen over time also prioritize very heavily distribution. They want to be present. Yes, the demand is generated by brand love. It's generating, there's preference for the brand, but they also understand that they have to be present in every buying situation. I mean, in some, again, these brands do all of these things and many more consistently. Consistency is also key because then these brands are able to build trust in the minds of consumers, amongst other things.
Thank you very much, Seyi. I think that those were some interesting perspectives that you just shared. If I were to summarize, I would say to the brands, your assets are very important. Aggressive marketing, aggressive expansion to new geographies, new locations. The good brands are adept at storytelling. And of course, your brand purpose. I mean, if you look at what Seyi has just shared with us now and try to compare with the brands that are doing great in Africa, whether they were African brands or not, look at Coca-Cola. I'm sure a very subtle review of the way they market aggressively, even after having been in existence for over 100 years, just speaks to all the facts that you just mentioned. Dangote following very closely with that as well. There's a lot that many brands need to do in Africa, clearly. And I'm thinking, is it possible in this day and age for us to have a conversation without speaking about the current pandemic? I doubt that very much. So my next question is going to sort of like bring you into the pandemic conversation and how it is currently affecting Africa. And I'm going to start with you, Thebe. Africa is contending with numerous health and socio-economic issues. With the recent pandemic, all issues have been accentuated and brought to fore. Do you think brands have demonstrated leadership, and how is it affecting their brand equity? You're mute, Thebe, you're mute.
Thank you so much. I thought you wanted me muted. You don't want me to say anything. No, no. I think that's a very important question in terms of COVID and its impact on brands in the continent. I think what COVID has certainly done, it has leapfrogged us into the digital space. So all of a sudden now, we have been fast-tracked in terms of retracted back home, get into the digital space. But what's happened is it's asked us a few things. It's us individuals as well as brands, a couple of things. The first thing it's asked them is what matters? What matters? Because now during this period of absence when you couldn't trade as you could in the past, only the brands that did well and are being sustained are those brands that really mattered. So when Seyi speaks about purpose, so this time has asked a lot of brands, what is your purpose? Why do you exist? So COVID has helped us to ask ourselves that question. And then second is, what relationship do you have with your consumers? But the third most important thing that COVID has taught us, or has asked us, is how are you going to leverage technology to be able to deliver to your people, to your customers, to your target base? So I think in the main, a lot of brands have done well because COVID has also asked them another question. Are you able to adapt? So now if you look at the global brands, have done a beautiful job of it. If you look at Ford said, how do we use our resources, our assets, and start making ventilators, not cars? This is how do we adapt to the change and use ventilators? I think it's Gucci says, how do we use sanitizers? We've got the factories which do colognes. How do we do sanitizers with that? And a whole host of brands have had to think back and says, how do we adapt? But most importantly for African brands has been the question in terms of, what are you doing for society? Other than just selling me oil, selling me flour and all those, now when I need you most, when I cannot afford, when I cannot pay, what are you doing? How are you helping me out of this? And there's a lot of brands in the continent which have understood that it is not always about selling. When you understand the higher purpose, when you understand that if these consumers are wiped out by this pandemic, your business will not succeed, will not continue to exist. So for the short time, just this time, it is not about profit. It is about purpose, and it is about being a socially responsible brand. And we can extend this beyond the pandemic. We can look at what's happening with the Black Lives Matters, with the Me Too, with the Me Too movement, that brands are being asked bigger questions now. They're being asked bigger questions. They said, yes, you make a lot of money from us, but now that we are struggling for self-identity, for recognition, how are you helping us to do that? That's why you're beginning to see, for example, what Nike has done with their Don't Do It campaign. And many other brands have gone on to that space of speaking to consumers in their moments of need. So COVID has asked us an important question. What have you done for me in my moment of need? Because when you needed sales, I was there for you.
Thank you very much, Thebe. I think that was the points you made were quite critical, because at the end of the day, the disruption we see now as COVID is just one disruption. There's so many other disruptions coming. We don't even know yet. It's climate change, for instance. Look at what is going on in America with the crisis on police brutality. We don't know what that will lead to. I think brands should always just be prepared to go beyond, selling a product to actually connecting emotionally with their consumers. So very well said, Thebe. I'm going to ask Martin. You are a brand owner. How has this pandemic affected you? And what have you done to sort of alleviate the pain of your key consumers?
I think with COVID-19, the most important thing was to use our platform to get all the critical pieces of information into societies. Now, with a presence spanning across the whole continent, we offered our platform to all the organizations tasked with doing that, the CDC in Nigeria. And not only did we stop there, we said, okay, fine, now it is rendered going to school impossible. What do? We went back, we quickly acquired content and opened up channels that we stream to our customers at no extra charge, if I may add, so that kids, the younger members of our societies, can continue to learn. We cannot stop educating them. We further on went on, and with collaboration with the NTA and with government, opened up NTA channels so that even people that have not paid a subscription are able to access those channels during this period when the dissemination of critical information is being done. Furthermore, I think it was very important that we also lend a lending hand in procuring and distributing, helping with a contribution towards the distribution of PPEs. So we brought in stocks of PPEs and distributed that or handed them over to the NCDC. We also had some monetary assistance so that, it can never be enough. You can never have enough resources to fight such a pandemic. So with that, we continue to engage with stakeholders every day and offer our platform to try and educate, to try and get the messages out there. I don't think people are suffering COVID fatigue as yet. So we'll continue to give that message across all our Africa Magic, Super Sport, and all the platforms and channels that you switch on every evening so that it's top of mind and you understand how we can save ourselves. So that's what we have done as MultiChoice Nigeria.
Thank you very much, Martin. As we say in Nigerian parlance, you are doing well. You guys are MultiChoice, you are doing well. Okay, let me pause for a minute and take some questions from our guests so that we don't neglect them. Kefiwe Fife Molos, I hope I'm not murdering that name, but Kefiwe asked, how do we uplift the small brands to be the most admired brands? And I'm going to ask Feyi this. He's the brand guy. Feyi, tell us, how do we uplift small brands?
Okay. Thank you for Kefiwe's question. I think the small brands can also come to the fore because they have touch points that they can use. Brand building is not necessarily about huge budgets. There are a lot of brands that are trending on social media today that are known that actually have turned out to be, they're really, really small brands in terms of size and market share. But what we've discovered is that they have a clear message in terms of what their brand represents, and they've consistently, pushed these messages with content on their own level, on social media and different other touch points, and they've also engaged in some partnerships to get their brand essence and their brand value consistently delivered to their target customers. So it's basically the same approach that you use for a big brand. You just scale it down to what the small brand can handle, and then you build it. The key is to do it consistently and to do it proactively. That's really the key.
I'm going to stay with you for a minute, Feyi.
Well,
I'm sorry. I think I was mute. So I'm going to have to ask that again. Feyi heard me because he was with me. I'm going to have to ask again. Doinsola Ajayi asked, it's surprising that Pepsi is not on the list at all, especially in Nigeria. What do you think is the reason for this?
Thank you for that question, Doinsola. I think what every brand needs to know is when it comes to branding, you're not only playing with brands in your category, you are playing with all brands, because the consumers don't categorize brands in their minds. They just live their life and they relate with brands. And if you look at the methodology as Thebe presented it, the questions that we asked were around, what are the brands that you admire the most? And the brands that came to fore were brands who were strong brands, not just within their category, but were strong brands across other categories as well in terms of brand values. And so what may be happening with the Pepsi brand in Nigeria, that while it is a very strong brand within the CSD and the carbonated soft drink space and all of that, it may not necessarily have been built enough to be a strong brand across, regardless of the segment. The reason the brands like we look at the top three brands there, we see Coca-Cola, MTN, we see Samsung, is that all these three brands are brands that have become brands beyond just the category that they are playing in. Consumers recognize them as such. They have meaning beyond just the particular product that they are offering or that they are delivering and all of that. They've played beyond their segment, essentially. And I think that's the challenge that the Pepsi has, and perhaps even a number of the other Nigerian brands that we would have expected to be here, but they are not here.
That's me again speaking without unmuting, sorry. This question I said is from Melvin Odessen. And Seyi, I want you to take this question. Looking at the place of innovation in brand building, how has innovation helped brands stand out?
Well, thanks, Tosin. For any great brand, innovation is not just something they do, it's actually part of their DNA. Remember, what I was talking about, things we've seen over time that actually drive that's like commonalities across great brands. One of them is, penetration, exploring new customers, looking at new geographies, looking at new occasions. All of that is not going to happen with one size fits all kind of, product approach. It's going to be driven by innovation. So great brands are brands that do not do innovation as a tax. They actually, have innovation as part of their DNA.
Okay. Thank you, Seyi. I'm going to go back to Thebe now. Thebe, you have a question here that I think you would be most appropriate to answer from Yemisi Makinde. Do you plan to share these insights with African Development Bank and Africa Union? They can fast track development and growth of African brands. I think Yemisi is trying to direct you somewhere here.
Thank you so much. And that's a very important question because what we've tried to...
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Excellent. So very important question. What we've tried to do in the last few years is first to be able to build a sustainable and a consistent and reliable baseline study to be able to have that conversation. Because, it doesn't help after a year or two and to be able to say, now we've got a 10-year history of doing this. We've observed brands. We've observed the challenges that African brands have got in the continent. We are now in the process of initiating those conversations with two entities. One is from the African Development Bank, from a financing. The second one is from the Africa Free Trade Agreement Secretariat, because that's going to be set up in Ghana. Because part of the important thing that we're going to have to be able to do is, if we are going to open up borders between the continent, what brands are flowing through that? Are those African brands? And if it's not African brands, how do we enable African brands to flow through? Because the global brands have not had a problem flowing through the continent. They've been moving through the continent quite easy. But the challenge is African brands themselves. Similar to how it's been a challenge for human brands to move from country to country. It's going to be, we're going to have to face this. We're going to face that challenge, and we need to address how African brands move across borders. So yes, that's a conversation that we are advancing in terms of how we move in that. And then also with entities like the African Development Bank in terms of how they can support those African businesses and brands to scale them up and to get them to a position where they can do this. And when we do that, we know why it's important to do that. It's important to do that because behind every great brand is a great business. And behind every great business are people who are working and earning money and having jobs. And behind all the people who are earning and who are having jobs, we are creating a tax base. And behind every tax base, we are having the opportunity to keep the money in the continent and to use the money to build better roads, better schools, better hospitals, and a better Africa.
Thank you, Thebe. I'm going to ask Martin. There's a question here from Upongote Esu. He's speaking about stories. How do we create stories that resonate locally, especially for foreign brands? I don't know why he's asking locally for foreign brands, but maybe you would know. Martin?
Well, I can only speak about local stories because that's what we've set out to do. But maybe from a point of, if he's a storyteller, to encourage him to reach out if he has stories or he'd like to engage on how he can get his stories told onto our platform. We have avenues through which go to our website, reach out on our social media, Africa Magic, and tell us your story. We are willing and open to taking stories and amplifying them and putting the spotlight on. But in-house, we also have our own production facilities where we have our writers also tapping into what's happening inside this country, inside the different regions in Abia, and trying to customize stories for those localities so that the roads get better. There's nothing as maybe discouraging. You think you have a story, and then it doesn't land. From a TV perspective, it doesn't make TV because nobody's going to watch it. So there are experts within our space that are always willing to come and sit and listen to people and help them with how to direct the stories and hit the spot. It is for that reason that we started the multi-channel in Nigeria, so that story writers are from here, and they can write stories that resonate locally and are made for Nigerians by Nigerian writers and filmmakers.
Totally agree with you. That's very important, Martin. I'm going to ask you one question before I ask you all to do your wrap-ups, because I think we have barely 10 minutes left. Seyi, Josiah Kimanzi asked, what would you say are the 3 mandatories that African brands need to elevate their game? I think you spoke to it before. Perhaps Josiah is just joining us. If you can just do a quick summary for him. Three mandatories.
Right. Thanks, Tosin. Yeah, like I said, I actually spoke to this before now, but I think just broadly, top 3 would be drive penetration. New customers, new geographies, new occasions. Very solid storytelling. Based on being meaningful to your consumers. Clear brand purpose. Also connect very deeply with customers. This is already assuming that you understand your customers, your product and what's pushing out there, and cities on clear expansion sites so that the need in the market. And lastly, now people love a brand. If you can have available at the point of purchase, that's missed opportunity. So distribution is key. Now with the advent of digital, it's easy actually to use the digital platform. One of the things we found out during this COVID-19 pandemic that's still ongoing is that there's been massive growth in the use of integrated e-commerce platform, and that is also changing the game because distribution, it becomes a cheaper, platform to actually drive distribution as against having to build bottom up. As a lot of brands are actually doing. Of course, you still need to do that, but now there's e-commerce where there can be shared economy of driving distribution.
Thank you very much. I'd like us to dive straight into our wrap-ups. Hi, Thebe, can you hear me now? Okay. So I want us to go into our closing remarks. And Thebe, I was just saying that I'm going to start with you. It's been 10 years of this consumer-led survey, 10 years of assessing African brands. What does the next 10 years portend? What do the next 10 years portend from your view? I want you to take it from the overarching view so that the same question Martin can take from the perspective of a platform owner, Feyi can take from the perspective of a consumer expert, and Seyi can take the same question from the perspective of someone that understands the trends and how the trends are moving. And we'll just use that as our wrap-up. Thank you, Thebe. Next 10 years.
Thank you so much. I've been part of...
You're mute, Thebe.
I'm unmute. Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. I've been part of 2 great brands. I started my career at Colgate, which is a global brand. And I spent quite a significant time building the Nike brand across the continent. I don't mind global brands at all. I love global brands. But what I want to see in the next 10 years, I want to see all the global brands shaking in their boots. I want them to be shaking because African brands are not displacing them, but they are giving them a run for their money. That African brands are making it difficult or even easy for an African consumer to choose African brands. That's what I think we'll see. So I don't advocate the removal of any African global brand from a continent. I advocate for the rise of African brands. I think if we look at every single stock exchange across the continent, and if every single brand on that list is African, we'll be doing well. We shouldn't have a Jumia running to the New York Stock Exchange to list. We should be having a Jumia saying that I need to list in the continent, in Nairobi, in Lagos, in Johannesburg, in Cairo. That's what we need to be striving for. But most importantly, over the next 10 years, I want to see a rise in entrepreneurship, because a rise in African entrepreneurship will result in a rise in creating made in African brands and made in Africa excellence. And made in African excellence is not excellence that is of a lesser standard. It is excellence that delivers to the global standard, but it is informed by the African reality.
Thank you, Thebe. Martin.
We're fortunate that we're in an era that sees a lot of African youth, while they still admire what is happening abroad, they firmly have their feet on the ground, and they believe that what they can do in Africa can still travel. I think they've seen what the musicians have done. You cannot go anywhere into a good party in wherever in the world and you do not hear a Nigerian song. It's impossible. The movies are hot behind the music. The fashion is going that way. So I think if we were to even spread further into more innovative ideas, sectors, and we begin to collectively work towards spreading, firstly within Africa and beyond, and I think we'll be on the right track. But I don't know who's coordinating that. You know, there's no aggregator place that these young kids can go to. That is why everybody is trying to do it the shortcut way on social media. Or if they have the means to go where a Thebe would say, okay, I'll wear ethnic and I'll post to my followers on social media and hope that somebody calls and says, where can I buy that? It seems so fragmented that we still have some work to do, and I believe that and I hope that in 10 years, it's better organized, so that if I want to buy a Ayula painting or his beautiful blue face, there's an app maybe where I go and I pick up all this fine art from Botswana, where Wilson, or I go to South Africa, I pick a country and I can buy a painting to hang in my living room without asking Thebe, when are you going to Kenya? Please, can you bring me a Maasai painting? That won't get us anywhere. We need to aggregate, we need to collaborate, so that in 10 years, we're doing it in a much better way.
Fantastic. Thank you, Martin. Feyi, over to you.
Thank you, Tosin. I think for me, the next 10 years would really be about seeing an African global brand, you know, and by this I mean if you go to New York, for instance, you get there and you see Uniqlo on the streets. They're a very big brand, but Uniqlo is an Asian brand that has penetrated the African market. And if you look at the basic definition of a global brand, is essentially a brand that has traveled across markets. And like Thebe said, we need to see brands that are African brands that are built, that are strong, but now they can travel markets, they can travel continents. More importantly, I think indigenous brands also have got to, you know, take a more realistic view of the African consumer and begin to build their brands for the African consumer. Indigenous brands have the advantage of knowing the African consumer far better than global brands, largely because they're Africans. They are built here, they are here, they grew up here, and so on and so forth. So it will be great to see that over the next 10 years, because people are embracing their Africanness, if we can put it that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Feyi.
Right. I think I will just wrap up my view of the next 10 years in three buckets. In 10 years, we'll be talking 2030. The African consumer will be extremely youthful in terms of, the age bracket we'll be talking to at that point. So, number one, it's any brand that's going to grow, that's going to be massive in another 10 years, and an African brand must then deliberately invest in understanding the evolving consumer. That is non-negotiable. Number one. Number two would be authentic innovation. So not me too, but really, innovations that can travel, like Feyi also highlighted, will also be key as, things are changing with the consumers. We are also innovating, and then this innovation is actually original, authentic, and can actually move outside, the shores of the parent country to the continent and the world at large. Thirdly, distribution strategy. A lot of African brands at times do not have view of how they want to grow. They don't have view of going outside their parent country. For also see the rise of African brands in the next 10 years, African brands, they must have distribution strategy that is not localized, that is looking at the entire continent, that is also, having a view of the world at large.
Thank you, Seyi. At this point, I must say every good thing must come to an end. And this has been the most engaging conversation ever. Hopefully our participants feel the same way. You guys can share your comments in the chat box as we round up and let us know if you found this very insightful. I did, and I manage brands, and I still found it extremely insightful. I told you these were the best. So guys, these 4 men have spoken. This is a charge to African brand owners, brand managers. You heard them, they're the experts, they've spoken. This is your opportunity to take some of these tips away. Take it as a charge, take it as a challenge. This conversation must continue. We want to see a difference by the time we come back here next year. Don't we, Thebe, Feyi, and Martin? So this is a charge to African brands. Make African brands rise again. From me to Seyi Adeoye, thank you very much. It was great chatting with you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Martin is going to give us a closing remarks. Martin is Martin and MultiChoice, also our host today. So we'd like him to just give us the closing remarks as we end this session, the webinar for today.
Well, thank you so much, Tosin, for steering this. Thank you, thank you. Thank you to everybody that tuned in and took part in this event. It happens once a year, and I think we can only look forward to a much bigger event next year. To Feyi, to Seyi, thank you so much. Thebe and the Brand Africa team, thank you, thank you. I must say that it was very gratifying to see Nigerian brands in the top 100 brands in Africa. Dangote, Glo, Jumia, MultiChoice Nigeria, and NASCO up there in the top 100. So I think it's gratifying to see that at least 5 or 6 or 7 brands are in there, and knowing our Niger spirit, next year is 20 brands up there. It's a promise, I'm telling you that next year it is 20 brands up there in the top 100. So with that, I think go grab your Africa Business or Business Africa, African Business Magazine, because all these brands are featured in there. So read at leisure and learn. And I think there are contact details for all the brand custodians that you can reach out and see how you can get insights from them. To build a brand is not an easy thing in Africa. It is not an easy thing. And well done to everybody that has managed to get the brands up to where they are. I think Open Square, thank you so much. Brand Africa, thank you. Henley Business School, academic partners, I went to Henley, by the way. Geopol, Kanta, Brand Leadership Africa, thank you so much. Madam Tosin, again, thank you so much. You did a sterling job. And Thebe, let's do it again very soon. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us this year. It was lovely to have you all. You get the recording will be sent to you. Thank you to the team. Thank you to Thebe for doing this. He's been on it for 10 years. It's always exciting to see the next one. I can't wait to see what happens next year. Thank you to the rest of the panelists, to Seyi, to Martin, to Tosin, to everyone that has worked with us behind the scene to make this happen. Thank you all for coming, and see you next year. Thank you.